I flew across the country on a red-eye to buy my dream car the same day it was listed on Facebook Marketplace. And here's the story. If this sort of video sounds interesting to you, or you want to follow along as I build a billion-dollar company with driven auto care, please hit subscribe below. Let's get to the video. I am 31 years old, which means that when I was an impressionable youth getting into cars as a 5, 6, 7, 8-year-old, the Lamborghini Murcielago was being released. And this car at the time was the poster car for my generation. This was the car on the cover of Need for Speed Hot Pursuit 2. This car was in all the Need for Speed, Project Gotham, and other similar games, Forza, I believe, at the time. And you could drive this car in every video game you wanted. It was on every TV show. It was in every movie. It was a gorgeous, appealing car in every single way I wanted a Murcielago. This was capped off as I grew up and became of driving age with the Mercy SV that came out in 2010 and was reviewed by Richard Hammond in Abu Dhabi, where he drag raced the Bugatti Veyron and drove it through the sand dunes of the United Arab Emirates. And it was an amazing fantasy of mine to someday own this car. But I really never came in contact with them. Throughout my childhood, my exposure to exotic cars was really only the Seattle Auto Show, where I got to see everything. I saw Zondas and Veyrons and Mercies, Aventadors when they came out. But I never really saw them on the road. I didn't know anybody that owned any exotic cars. And it was this complete and utter fantasy of mine that from where I was in life to wherever I may end up, that someday I might own a Murcielago. But at the time, it was just fairy dust to me. It was like I have no clue how that could possibly ever occur. And as a result, I didn't really set my sights on any specific dollar amount or vision or time frame or anything like that when I set out into my career thinking about my dream car. When I was 23 and working as an accounting consultant for the biggest accounting firm in the world in San Francisco, we had two automotive clients, Tesla and Uber. Tesla at the time was raising its first lease securitization note. Without boring you with the details, basically what that means is they signed up a bunch of people to lease the Model 3 right when it came out, and then they sold all of the lease contracts to a bank in exchange for $400 million. And it was my job to help make sure that legally that arrangement was going to work from an accounting perspective. So we had to review a bunch of contracts, do a bunch of financial models, and advise Tesla's finance team on how to structure this deal. Then we got to work on Uber. And because of my familiarity with car insurance, I was very familiar with deductibles and premiums and coverage ratios and coverage limits and reinsurance and how all of that worked. And so when Uber came to us and asked for help to structure their reinsurance policy with a subsidiary to make sure that it was being treated appropriately from an accounting perspective, again, I was pushed right to the forefront and asked to lead everything that we were doing on the project, despite being a 23-year-old, barely super green out of college accountant trying to figure it out. But because I knew so much about cars, this was the place for me to be. Within a couple of months, it became clear to everybody on my team that I knew what I was talking about when it came to the car business. And I had the thought, I should just focus on cars. And so I sought out to find an automotive-focused consulting firm that had an office in the San Francisco Bay Area. Around the same time, I also met my wife, who was about to move to London to get her MBA. And so in the end, I decided to go with her. So when I moved to London, I decided that I would also get my MBA so that I could basically reset my career path and enter in at a higher level in a much more generalist capacity where I could refocus myself onto automotive instead of accounting. Now you'll notice up till this point in the story, the Murcielago has not really been present. However, I want to direct your attention to this orange model of a Murcielago right here. That car I got when I was 8. The best memory I have of it is that I worshipped that model car. It has wax that's caked into all of the little pieces that were stuck on with glue onto that car because I treated it like I did my real car and I literally waxed it. I washed and waxed my model car because I cared about it that much. That thing was an absolute treasure to me, and it followed me everywhere I went in my life. So I've gotten the entrepreneurial bug. I've started making some money with my own business, and I'm starting to figure things out a little bit about how I can truly make more money than what my peers are making, or that the career path that I was on really dictated that I could make. So the idea, again, that I would someday own a Murcielago started to come back into my life. And around that time, I discovered someone on Instagram. And this person owned a one of 5 or 7, depending on who you ask, factory gated manual Murcielago SV. That car was in Switzerland in my favorite Lamborghini color, Rosso Vic. And it was the most special thing I had ever seen. And I basically sold myself when I started my business that someday I would own that car. I got to then sit in one of the other 5 manual SVs that was owned by a car dealer up in the Seattle area, Roy Katz. He has one of the manual Mercy SVs. I got to sit in that car. I got to touch it, feel it, experience these cars. And I said, yep, I want one of these one day. And I talked to him at the time, and he basically said, I've been offered $2 million for this car, and I turned it down. So I had some dollar amounts in my head, and I basically thought, by the time that the Rosso Vic car is legal to import into the US, that it would be 2035, because it's a 2010 car. It needs to be 25 years old before I can import it into the US. And by 2035, that car will probably be worth $5+ million, and I need to be prepared both from a financial perspective and an emotional perspective to spend that kind of money at that time for that car. In 2020, I made $7,000. In 2021, I made, I think, $40-ish thousand. In 2022, I made $150,000. And by 2023, I really felt like I had figured things out, and I was making over $400,000 in that year off of my consulting service fees. By June of 2024, it was becoming clear, and I had started to make a bit of money. I think by that point in the year, I'd probably made $200,000 or so. And I went out and I financed to the hilt an Aston Martin DBS, and I put 20% down, and I bought it for $92,000. So this was my entry-level supercar, and one of my favorite experiences with it is I took it to a show in the Bay Area, and I bumped into one of my classmates from college, and he looked at the car and said, dude, this is my all-time dream car. How in the world do you afford this at 28 years old? And I said, well, I put $18,000 down, and I pay $1,000 a month for it, so it's really not that big a deal. And I had begun to conceptualize to myself what exotic car ownership really looked like, because I stepped into it, I'd gotten the loan, and I was making the payments, and I figured it out, and I felt that I had earned it. So at the end of the year, my consulting business helped to close one of the largest transactions that occurred during the year. We sold a $415 million heavy equipment rental business in Michigan. And the company that I worked with got $7 million out of it, and I got a small chunk of that at $615,000 wired into my bank account on December 31st, 2024. Now is when things get good. I used that money in 3 ways, and then it was all gone. It's unfortunate, I know. So what I did is I paid off my student loans. I paid off a line of credit that Driven Auto Care had that I used 2 months later to buy our 3rd location. And I bought my Murcielago. So in those first couple of weeks of January 2025, I was kind of trying to figure out what to do from a capital allocation perspective. How should I invest this money? How should I spend it on things that are going to be accretive to my life, to make my life better? And at first, I was pretty set on getting a rental property in South Dakota. And I felt that home ownership would be a really valuable feather in the cap for that as I continued to build my businesses. So we were shopping for a house around $200,000 in South Dakota. And we had made a couple of cash offers on a couple of different houses. And we were going back and forth with the sellers, and we just weren't able to come to an agreement. However, at the same time, I had another thought randomly pop into my head. And that thought was this: you know, I bet the cheapest Murcielago out there is around $200,000. And so I started talking to some Murcielago sellers. There was a white car in Texas. There was another white LP640 down in SoCal. And I started interacting with these people. And I was coming up short every single time. I was getting desperate and felt like I was either going to buy a house or a Murcielago in the next week, somehow, some way. And though I was striking out with all of the current listings, I decided there was one last ditch Hail Mary that I should throw. And that was to DM Ed Bolian on Instagram. I had talked to him before. I had met him once at Monterey Car Week. And so I didn't really think he remembered who I was or even really cared. But I messaged him anyways. And I said, Ed, I can afford right now only an Ed Bolian style Mercy. Do you know of any that are currently for sale? And he responded in 5 minutes. And he went, well, there is one that just got listed stupid cheap on Facebook Marketplace. And I used Auto Tempest's national search for Marketplace, and I did not come up with any stupid cheap Murcielagos. So at the risk of bugging Ed, I messaged him again and I said, I can't find it. Can you show me where it is? Can you point it to me? And he screenshotted the listing. And it was actually posted in a group, Exotic Cars for Sale by Owner. And it's this yellow car getting backed out of a garage on some cobblestones in a weird area in New Jersey. So I joined the Facebook group super fast. And this message exchange had happened kind of early in the morning, like 8 in the morning or something like that. I joined the Facebook group. I found the listing. I messaged the guy. I left a comment saying I had messaged him. And he got back to me about an hour later. So that's like 11 in the morning. And me and Eugene start going back and forth about the car. It's a little too good to be true. We have a car that has been repainted from Rosa Vic to Giallo Midas, the factory launch color of the Murcielago. It's a 2008 LP640 with 16,000 miles. And if that was the end of the story with the repaint, takes a bit of value off the car. It was kind of a McDonald's spec with a red interior. You would think that something like that, LP640, relatively low miles, is worth around $300,000. There was one salvage title Murcielago that was for sale for $225,000. This one was listed for $160,000. The only other thing that really knocked the value on this car was the title. It was a salvage title, which certainly ruled out a ton of buyers. It was still super cheap, and I knew that this was not going to last, and I had to jump on this opportunity if I was going to take it, if it was real. Having bought other sketchy cars from sketchy sellers on Marketplace before, I tried to do my due diligence. And I had him send me videos of weird parts of the car. He actually ended up sending me a ton of detailed information, service records. I called the shop that he claimed it had been worked on at, and they confirmed that it's a real car and a real person. And so I went, all right, I think I could do this. I have that kind of money in my bank account, and let's talk to the wife. There's a Murcielago LP640. I know you don't care, but hear me out. There's a Murcielago LP640 for sale in New Jersey right now for way too cheap. This is a market that's going up. Can I buy it? What do you think? The plan was that when we were going to buy the house, she was going to contribute some money towards it, and I was going to put down the bulk of the $200 for whatever house we got. And so this was a significant, joint financial decision that we had to make. She said, well, what do you think? You think you should buy it? And I said, well, the market on these is really going up. This car is worth more than what this guy is asking for it. And if I buy it even at full price and maybe I can negotiate something off, it is immediately going to make money. And she said, okay, go do it. That was about 4 p.m. in the afternoon. That was January 10th, 2025. And I had already spent $400,000 paying off debt. So now it was time to go buy a Lamborghini because that is what Lamborghini owners do. And after flying across the country on a red eye, I landed in New Jersey on January 11th, about 9 in the morning. About 24 hours after I had first seen the post, it was snowing, it was very cold, and there I was to buy a Murcielago. I got in an Uber. I started going towards this guy's house. It seemed like a really nice neighborhood. It seemed like the kind of place where a Lamborghini would be stashed in a garage somewhere. I felt pretty comfortable with the deal, but nevertheless, this was a little too good to be true. I was still a little worried I was gonna get abducted or killed or robbed or something like that. And so I texted my wife and I said, well, if I don't text you back in 15 minutes, call the cops. I'm here. I'm in New Jersey in this luxury neighborhood. Got out of the taxi, walked up to the front door of this mansion and knocked on the door. And here was Eugene in his tracksuit, ready to show me his Lamborghini. So he takes me to the garage where this Murcielago is parked under a cover in the center of a 2-car garage. Definitely a waste of space, but I guess he had plenty of it. We take the covers off. There it is, this yellow over red McDonald's spec LP640 that is super clean. And it's clear that this guy barely drives the car. And in conversations with him, come to learn he'd driven it 3,000 miles in 7 years of ownership. And he had managed the rebuild process from the salvage title when it was crashed into a guardrail. The front end was clipped. I actually have the front end off of an '07 LP640 that burned down in Canada. And it was then repainted yellow because it was a lot cheaper than repainting it in Rosa Vic which is a triple stage metallic pearl, crazy paint job that the guy didn't want to deal with. And so he had this car sitting in the garage for 7 years, driving it occasionally, and he was ready to sell it. And the reason he wanted to sell it and the reason he had it listed so cheap is because he had to pay a tax bill. So here I was, flying across the country to buy a Lamborghini from a Russian who needed to pay a tax bill. And that is the story I get to tell people for why I got my car so cheap. He pulls it out of the garage after we look around it, and remember, it's snowing, so there's snow on the ground, the all-wheel drive handling it wonderfully. We take it out onto the road, which had been salted, and I drove my Murcielago for the first time. And I had no clue what I was looking for. All I could figure out is the rotors were warped to shit. And I decided to buy the car on the spot for full asking price. So we went to the bank. I got out a cashier's check. I still have the receipt from that withdrawal. $160,000, poof, gone from my account. And then we waited for a flatbed to take the Mercy to Interstate Motorsports in Pennington, New Jersey, who was able to clean it up, check it over, and then arrange transport over to the Bay Area. Now I've owned this car for about 1.5 years and 5,000 miles that I've gotten to put on it in that time. It's needed about $20,000 in deferred services and repairs, and I wrapped it red with all graphics from Driven Auto Care and We Are Driven all over it to try to match Rosovic before I decide to take the car down for several months and get it painted, and when I get the budget to do so as well. And that's the story of how I got my Murcielago. You work hard for 10 years, you end up being able to afford your ultimate dream car, and I was able to do that. I bought the car in cash. I still have the title very proudly that says salvage on it. Nobody is the wiser at Cars and Coffee unless they ask, which I'm perfectly happy to share, and I'm super excited for many thousands of miles to come. And before you ask, no, it's not gated, and it never will be, because I'm 6'8", and my leg cannot fit in the center console of the car, so it's not worth converting for me unless maybe it becomes worth it to spend the 60 grand to convert it and then sell it for a profit down the road. That's a later conversation. I would only sell it to get another one. I will always have a Mercy in my life, but it also means I'm not interested in that other Rosovic SV anymore, so I'm kind of done. I got to figure out what other kind of cars I want, and you can follow along to make sure that I earn them and that you are inspired to go and earn your dream cars as well. So if you're not subscribed, make sure to get subscribed. Leave a comment. If you have any questions or feedback, leave a like so we show up higher in the YouTube algorithm. And thank you very much for watching. Stay driven.